Yes, even you too can learn Linux. Hi, my name is George and I help people through long form videos and just doing stuff online. So, for the last month I've been learning Linux and I spent the whole month trying with the goal of learning the Linux command line, which is the most basic form of Linux that there is. The commands is what I'm talking about here. Things like ls, grep, what's the other one? Like print env, printf, whatever. Like these sort of basic commands. I wanted to acquire them so I could use them in my operating system and just have a general functional knowledge of Linux for the future, for me and my IT career, which I'm trying to pursue. And how I did this, we'll get into that in a sec, but more importantly, this video, by the end of this video, you should be able to know how to learn Linux for yourself, and you don't have to spend hours and hours researching. You can just come to me, who's already learned, and I can share some of my knowledge. Now, I'm not saying that I'm perfect and I know the command line ins and outs and everything. This video will hopefully take you from someone who didn't know anything about Linux, like you didn't know how to use ls or pwd, print working directory, and it will take you from someone who can now use basic commands to navigate the system and do those sorts of things. Now obviously I'm not going to be teaching you, but I'm going to be teaching you how to learn. So without further ado, I'll just briefly get into what I did, and then we'll get into how you can use my mistakes to help you. So for the last month, I said I had the goal. How I went about this goal was I wrote down a game plan. Now, game plan for me was reading some books. My original plan was to read through a bunch of books, then make flashcards, then practice the stuff. Now, this is not a good idea. So what ended up happening for me was I read the book called How Linux Works was the name of the book. I started reading that. I got into chapter 8, I believe, reading this book, and it went through the basic commands, the navigation stuff, which I was trying to learn, which is great. But it had such high-level, in-depth explanations of, systemd or all these other complicated aspects that it was quite overwhelming to a brand new user who'd only just transitioned from Windows recently because they got a ThinkPad and now they want to learn Linux, all this. So yeah, that was the sort of complications there. And then after that, so the original plan was to read through that book and make the flashcards. I didn't make the flashcards. I just started reading, and then it was too much. So I decided that I was going to get a book that was going to teach me just the command line, nothing else. And that was probably the better idea. So I would recommend that for anyone who is going to buy a book. I'd recommend, what's the name of the book? I was trying to recall. How to Learn the Linux Command Line is the name of the book, I believe. I actually sort of looked through 3 books, and that was the best formatted for me. You don't have to choose that one. You can choose any book you like. I just prefer that format of book for learning, and it just generally fit my personality and just structured in a way that was easy to learn and easy to grasp the information. So How to Learn the Linux Command Line. So I was going through that. Then this time I decided I wasn't just going to read through the whole thing willy-nilly. I was going to go through and make flashcards as I went. And now this is a crucial point, because flashcards is what enables us to store the information in our longer term memory. So if you guys are aware of flashcard systems such as Anki, I would highly recommend you utilize them in your studies for Linux as well, because it just keeps you on edge. If you were just watching a YouTube series or tutorial, then you would obviously be following along and you would taking the information that way. But the flashcards test you every day for things that you've learned perhaps a month ago, and I found this very useful for learning things such as bash shortcuts. So how do I get to the end of the line on bash? Control E. These sort of quick fire things that you could forget if you don't use them enough, but they're still worth knowing just for the ease of use of your Linux system. So that's how I went about that. So I got through to there's parts of the book rather. So part 1 of this How to Learn the Linux Command Line book is about navigating the system. So learning all the basic commands so you can navigate, you can grep stuff like find stuff, add permissions, and all of just the basic raw fundamental stuff. I believe mounting drives, that comes a little bit later, but it's got the core fundamental commands that I wanted to learn, and that you probably want to learn if you're new to Linux. And why should you focus on just the core stuff? Because obviously learning the complicated stuff first is going to be too much, which I found out the hard way. So do not do that. So learn the the simpler part first would be my advice. Now, I did that, and then whilst I was doing that, the key bit here was I actually practiced the commands. So a lot of people passively read, and this is actually there's a similar phenomenon in the self-help book market, that people tend to read through books that are going to help them, but they don't implement the advice. Now, my advice back to myself as well would be to, when I read through the chapter, make sure I've done every single exercise before I move on to the next one. And this isn't about perfecting the learning, because if there's something you really don't understand, then I believe it's okay to skip, because in school we're often taught that we have to learn there and then, and if we do not understand, we cannot skip ahead to the chapter. We have to, stay on this chapter. Now, I think that's not very useful, but I believe if you are able to somewhat understand it and you can implement it, then obviously implement the exercises. But if something's beyond your understanding, then skip. But what I did, and what you should not do, is read through it, understand it, not practice it, and then carry on to the next chapter. If you read it and understand it, you should practice it anyway, because the real key difference, and this is the key difference in learning in general, is that the practice is what makes perfect. The practice is what enables the real learning, because this is all theory, right? Reading just books and watching tutorials is great, it's all theory, but if you don't follow along, then you've never learned for yourself. You've just got a lot of quality input nevertheless, but it's the action that follows the input that is the most important. So that's what I was trying to nail down in that point there. So yeah, I did that, read through the book, read through part 1. Now, part 1 is, like I said, about the fundamental commands for Linux, which is what I was originally trying to learn, but I looked at the other parts of the book, and in the chapters, or the parts following, it had configuring the environment, which is something, how to make the colors of your terminal change and all that, fancy stuff like writing your Linux. Like, I don't really care too much about that. So I did actually learn the some of the syntax for that. Like, I believe, I can't remember the specific name, but it's things like, /b is, backspace or whatever. The environment, I believe not environment variables, some sort of variables. I'll have to probably go back and study, but like I said, I didn't really spend much time on that chapter. I just skipped over that part. And then the next part was the more in-depth daily usage of the commands. So it covered things like networking, adding storage drives, printing, these sorts of things. And I actually stopped here because I believe that in this part I didn't want to learn all of the nitty-gritty how to do some network stuff, when my main goal was to learn the basic commands. So to get the sort of 80% of results, I would recommend to any viewers who are going to follow my advice here, is to use part 1 of this book, get all the basic commands, and then you can learn the specific stuff, come back to the learn the specific stuff later on when you need, because I found that it took me about a month to do this, right? This was like 3 hours every day of, focus study, or on some days it was about an hour and a half, focus study on, textbook. There's me with the ebook on my laptop here, you see behind me, going through it, making flashcards, studying the commands, practicing them every day. And if there was something I didn't understand, I would make an effort of looking up the video. So, for example, symbolic links, I had a bit of a hard time getting my head around that, so I looked up a video, bam, that solidified my understanding, and then I practiced it using the advice I followed in the video. So looking stuff up is great, but again, it's not real learning. Like I really want to stress that don't do what I did, where you read through stuff first and not implement any action. It's all about the action. It's all about doing the practical stuff in the real world. It's going to make you a better Linux user, a better learner in general. This it does somewhat apply to language learning as well, but for learning in general in life, like I say, inputs, outputs, that's all you really need to know. Get high quality input, make it into high quality output, then you've learned something, is probably my philosophy on that one. Okay, so that was the Linux command line. What can you expect from learning this much? The main goal was to navigate the system and do basic things like edit text files, play music, media, watch TV, or things I've downloaded on my system, and that was actually achievable, I'd say, only halfway through part 1 of this book. So reading through that would be a good idea. You can alternatively, if you want, watch tutorials on each of the sections. Like, you don't have to go and buy the book or download the book, however you download them. You can obviously watch tutorials, but I found that reading actually gives you more of an insight as to how the system works and why things are the case. Like, the dots are drawn together, because people in YouTube videos will say, oh, on Vim, this keybind is this, and systemd is basically just like this. They really get it very simplified, which is great for if you're just trying to implement some of that stuff. But if you want to know the theory behind it, and if you're thinking longer term, if you're going to work in the field of Linux or have Linux in your daily life, like for example cybersecurity, then it's better to know the fundamentals of how the system works, because that will enable you to use the tools in the right way, sort of thing. But you don't have to read pages of books, but it is nice to have, is what I'm getting at. You don't need it to learn, but it's nice to have. And for my personal preference, I like to read and get some theory and get some history as well, because it's quite the quite good part about this book was it had the history of things like Unix, where that came from, all of these other extra fun bits and pieces. Now, one of the issues that I faced was learning was that I use Korean fonts and Korean text for certain things. I like to make text files in Korean, and I write down my thoughts and what have you. However, in the default, I'm running Manjaro on my ThinkPad at the moment, but the default terminal will not support UTF-8 characters, or it says it will. You might have English, so in your variables in your bash RC, I believe, you might have locale set to maybe English -UTF-8, but it says UTF-8, but it doesn't display UTF-8 characters. Now, the way you go about this is obviously to get a locale. So you need to download the locale for your, not download, sorry, uncomment the locale in the file. You might have to look this one up. I believe it's profile/locales or something. There's a file on your system where it'll have all the locales. You need to uncomment that and set it to your terminal locale, so that the UTF-8 characters will be displayed on screen. So that is just one little small thing that you should be aware of if you're going to use another language while going through these tutorials and trying to use the terminal yourself, because you might get so far but then the text won't be displayed on screen. Or also, if you haven't already, the best program I've found for inputting foreign text onto Linux is FCTIX5, I believe is the name of it. There's some others. I've tried iBus, I've tried UIM. Those also work, but I found FCTIX5 it's been the best with sort of longevity, stability, and general ease of use. And you can set it so it has groups for different languages. So if you're a Korean speaker like myself, but you also want to use some Chinese characters here and there, you can set up different keyboards. You can set up things for like ancient languages, like I know you can get like weird Hungarian characters on there, or Greek stuff, Latin stuff, whatever. So you've got all of your language needs fulfilled by that one program, so I'd highly recommend that if you're an alternative language speaker. The only other issues I would say, some of the programs in the book aren't actually installed on your system by default. So there's some of the binaries, I believe locate isn't actually installed on Manjaro, at least it's mlocate, and there's little sort of tweaks and changes like that. So if a command doesn't work whilst you're following it, don't panic, perhaps look it up for your distro of choice, because obviously people following this are going to be on all sorts of different distros, Ubuntu, Red Hat, whatever, you name it, right? But at least I can only say for Manjaro, the one locate is actually switched to mlocate, and there were a few others. So do be sure to look those up if a command just suddenly doesn't work. Like I wouldn't recommend doing what I did, which was installing the command. So for example, I just did pacman s locate, get the locate command, but there's actually already an mlocate on the system, and then it was just kind of a little bit unnecessary. So yeah, just make sure, because the book, I believe I read the 6th edition. It was written in 2013, so there's going to be some, congruencies, like things that do not work. So just bear that in mind. The good thing about YouTube tutorials, if you're choosing to follow those, you get the information that is current, most up to date. So there is a plus side to that. Now I think that is mostly how. I think that gives a good summary of how you guys can go about learning it yourself. Now, I want to actually talk about the sort of why you would even want to do this. Like, what are the real benefits? Because if you've made it this far, you've probably understood how, but you might be sold on why. So my sort of selling you for why is it's made my life particularly a lot easier with editing text files. So I maintain a list of ideas documents as part of my general proclivity for productivity. what I mean by this, so if there's a topic such as AI, I'll have a little text document on my computer about AI, or things that I think about in the shower, you know, just write down. Should I pursue this degree? Should I pursue cyber? Should I do this? Should I do that? I maintain idea documents, and I really love editing text. Now, lucky, the good thing about Linux is everything is a file, everything is text editable, and if you learn how to edit text using a program like Vim, which it teaches you in the book as one of the fundamentals, you can really speed up your just general getting things on paper or getting things on pixels, because the speed is just much better than what I've been used to in previous OSs such as Windows and Mac, although I didn't really use Mac, to be honest. The other why would be to use Linux or the Unix command line, or I'm not sure if you should call it the Unix command line or Linux command line or whatever you want to call it, but I'm going to call it Linux command line. The Linux command line is also pretty much compatible with Mac, so Mac uses something called Z Shell, or Z Shell, the Americans will call it, and then most Linux distributions use Bash, or this one behind me is using Zish, but basically it's all the same. Despite the shell being different, they all use this pretty much the same similar commands. Obviously there's a few differences, like I mentioned earlier, with the mlocate versus locate per distribution, but if you learn Linux command line, you can also use that on a Mac OS system, and now that might be useful if your family uses Mac, or if you're in IT and you are happening to work with Apple computers. So that's a little plus I quite liked. Obviously, you know, hacking and these sorts of things require Linux. Linux is also just learning that little basic bit of command line and reading a little bit about, you know, things like bootloaders, things like what binaries are, you know, has helped me way better understand how a computer works. Like, it's just revolutionized my general thoughts about computing, especially with using like a ThinkPad like this. I know obviously I'm, you know, that meme ThinkPad user, oh my god, but I felt that having a separate machine just for Linux, just that I can tinker with and look at all these config files and, oh, what's that doing there? Like, why, if I press, you know, PSE, it shows all these weird numbers and processes. What's a PID? Oh yeah, like all of these different elements of computing that were once sort of almost hidden from you on Windows or Mac. They don't really allow you to configure things right to the finest detail, which obviously I don't really care about configuring things to the finest detail too much, but it's about being able to see it and understand it that broadens your knowledge of computing in general. So Linux is just a really good thing to learn. Also, it's free. Also, it's not spyware. So I mean, that's a really good plus, isn't it, guys? Not that everything that's free in life is, you know, great, but Linux is pretty up there on my list of free things that I've enjoyed. Okay, so I think that pretty much gives an overview. So just to recap what you guys should do: don't read through books and not make any flashcards and not practice any of it. You want to get yourself a good book, get yourself a good quality bit of information. You don't have to do this, you can use YouTube tutorials, you don't actually have to read anything. You could probably just do it all through man pages if you're really hardcore, but if you're like me who likes to know a bit of the background and likes to read things, get yourself a good quality book. The book I would recommend is How to Learn the Linux Command Line by, I have no idea, I'll probably link it in the description. Then go through part 1 just to learn the fundamental commands, and then from there you can learn whatever you'd like. That's exactly what I've done, and I found the experience to be very, very beneficial. Make sure you're practicing your commands as you go. Look up things you don't know. If a command isn't working from the book, look it up on DuckDuckGo or Google if you use that godforsaken thing. Nah, I'm joking. Google's fine. Just, you know, less private, but whatever. Look it up, find it out for your distribution, and I think that has covered everything that I wanted to talk to you guys about. Oh yeah, also the UTF-8 stuff. So if you guys use another language, make sure you set your locale to a UTF-8 locale. Get a foreign input system, so FC IGX5 is the one I use. You can use others, UIM, iBus, also other options. Also get yourself a font. That's what I didn't mention earlier. You need a UTF-8 font or a font specific to your language, otherwise it will display just gobbledygook on your screen, especially for Korean, which is what I use. That is it all wrapped up. I hope you guys can use this to learn some basic Linux command line stuff, and maybe I've motivated you to do the same. And just so you know that anyone can do this, you don't have to be super smart, you just need to sit down, do the work, and that is literally how you do anything in life. So yeah, I wish you guys the best of luck. If you have any questions, I'm not an expert, so don't ask me, go and ask someone on Stack Overflow or something, and I will see you guys whenever I make something next. Also, a little update: I'm going to Korea next month or later this month, so there'll be more content in Korea. So see you guys then. Bye.